You've heard of ChatGPT, and recently you've been hearing more about Claude, Microsoft Copilot, which runs on Azure OpenAI, which is ChatGPT's engine in a Microsoft chassis, now also runs Claude in some areas. And the question I keep getting asked by smart business owners is, which one should we actually be using? Well, this is part one of a series of 3 videos we're going to do on Claude. So if not to make you an expert, at the very least, you'll be informed about which tools suit your business best. Claude, ChatGPT, Copilot, both. I'll break it all down for you. A year ago, you could dismiss this. Anthropic had no enterprise paperwork, and Claude wasn't game ready, but that has changed. Claude hit the news in a big way when they said they could not, in all good conscience, remove the AI checks for the US Defense Department. And OpenAI, on the other hand, rolled over. Microsoft's stock tanked as investors wondered whether Microsoft had backed the wrong horse. And instead of shying away from Claude, Microsoft threw $500 million at them and made clear they were invested in being the large language model hub instead of trying to tie themselves to one particular brand. All right, so Claude is now in Copilot. Great. What can I do with it? Claude is Anthropic's flagship model line. 3 sizes you'll see referenced here. Opus is the heavyweight novel writer, deep thinking, long processing for hard reasoning and long writing. Sonnet is the daily driver most people use, and Haiku is the small, fast one for quick tasks and high volume. Anthropic trained Claude using a method they call constitutional AI, which is a fancy way of saying the model is taught to follow a written set of principles. The practical result, if you've used both, is that Claude tends to follow complex instructions more carefully. It makes things up less confidently and is a bit easier to get to admit when it doesn't know something. Where Claude wins for a small business is in the long, careful work. Policy documents, client proposals, audit responses. Claude holds context across a 30-page document much better than most things I've tried. If you handed a stack of PDFs, insurance policies, regulatory findings, contracts, and you ask it to summarize or compare, the output will read much like a careful analyst did it. Claude is also the model Anthropic uses for Claude Code, the agentic coding tool we cover in part 3 of this, and Claude Cowork in part 2. Now, where Claude falls short is when your whole workflow lives in Teams and Outlook. You generally need an AI inside those apps, and as of today, Claude isn't there. You'd have to open a separate window. Also, if you're in a regulated industry where Microsoft on Canadian Azure is the only acceptable answer, the conversation is over before it begins. For Claude, Anthropic's enterprise offering can run on AWS Bedrock, which does have a Canadian data center, and you can pin Claude to that region the same way you pin to Azure, but that is way too complicated for small businesses. For all intents and purposes, you cannot run Claude in a Canadian-only data center. For instance, in all the government contracts for Microsoft Copilot, Claude is disabled because it breaks the data residency requirement. If you're finding this helpful, take a second to hit the subscribe button. We do put out helpful guides for Canadian businesses each and every week. Now, we run Microsoft 365 Copilot for the internal team because we live in Outlook and Teams all day. The 30-second wins that summarize this thread or draft this reply or build me a quick Excel table, those happen inside the app with the data already in front of you. I, on the other hand, have been running Claude for client deliverables, design proposals, technical writing, and an incredible amount of automation scripts that I'll show you when we get to Claude Code. A senior engineer drafting a 12-page security assessment for a healthcare client might use Claude, whereas a project manager replying to a client email about a scheduling is probably just going to do it in Copilot. The 2 tools cost roughly the same per seat in our setup. We use both because they're built for different work. If you want to run your own test, take a 20-page contract or a complicated document Paste it into both tools and ask the same 5 questions of each. Don't read the answers side by side. Read each one as if it were only the one you had. Which one would you trust to send onward without a second pass? That's your answer. If you need AI for long, careful writing and document analysis or review, then you want to use Claude. If you have 1 or 2 staff who work with code and want small automation tools built, you can build in Copilot Studio, but Claude is also very good with Claude Code. If you're in or sell to a regulated procurement chain where Microsoft is the approved vendor, you've got to stay with Azure OpenAI through Copilot. Claude is a very powerful tool written by Anthropic, and this is only part 1 of our 3-part series on it. Next week, we're going to dive into Claude Cowork and see what you can do with that in this ever-changing IT landscape. Be adaptive. We'll see you next time.